What if the world laughed at you, calling you broke, when deep down you held a power no one could imagine? The night it started like any other in Manhattan's glittering skyline. But the moment the black limousine pulled up to the private entrance of the most expensive penthouse in the city, the world tilted on its axis. The woman her ex-husband had mocked as penniless, abandoned, and forgotten. Her name was Elena Carter, and she was heavily pregnant. Her hand rested protectively over her rounded belly as she took a steady breath. The soft fabric of her ivory dress clung to her frame, not expensive by appearance, but worn with a dignity that radiated quiet strength in every stitch. Her eyes, however, told the real story. They burned with a determination so fierce that even the marble pillars seemed to bow in her presence. They knew exactly whose penthouse this was. Victor Hayes, her ex-husband. And the very same man who had once laughed in her face and told her she was a broke nobody who would never survive without him. It was the realization that everything they thought they knew about this woman was about to unravel. 6 months earlier, Victor had thrown her out with nothing but a suitcase and the clothes on her back. He paraded his mistress through high society galas, showering her with jewels, while Elena found herself wandering the city streets, humiliated and alone. She was not helpless. Now, the truth was about to come crashing down on him. Above her, the penthouse gleamed, a palace in the sky filled with rare art, crystal chandeliers, and silk-covered walls. No idea that the woman he had discarded as useless was about to walk back into his life in the most dramatic way possible. Down below in the lobby, one of the staff exchanged a nervous glance with another. "Isn't that his ex-wife?" the young maid whispered. The older doorman swallowed hard. "It is, but she looks different, stronger." Elena wasn't the timid, quiet woman who had once shrunk beneath Victor's voice. Every insult, every betrayal, every night she cried alone in a tiny rented apartment while carrying his child had only hardened her resolve. She was not here to beg. She was not here to reconcile. She was here to reclaim her dignity, to show the world and Victor that she was not broken. And when the elevator chimed at the top floor and the golden doors opened into the breathtaking expanse of the $50 million penthouse, the party inside came to a stunned halt. Music faltered. Glasses froze mid-air. Dozens of eyes turned as one, following the sound of her footsteps across the marble floor. Pregnant, radiant, and more powerful than any of them could have imagined. His mistress clutched his arm tighter, her painted smile faltering. The investors, the so-called friends who had once turned their backs on Elena, gasped and exchanged hushed words. No one had expected her to return, and certainly not like this. The silence was unbearable. Then Elena lifted her chin, her voice calm, measured, but sharp enough to slice through the air. To the outside world, she was ordinary, too ordinary for the glamorous Victor Hayes. Friends whispered that she was lucky to have caught his attention at all, that she should cling to him for dear life, that without him, she'd be nothing. She was born in a quiet Connecticut town, raised by her mother after her father passed when she was very young. What most people never knew was that her father had been no ordinary man. He was a visionary, the quiet architect of an empire built across finance, shipping, and technology. But he kept his fortune carefully hidden, tucked behind layers of trusts and private holdings. His dream had always been to give Elena a normal life, free from the suffocating expectations that come with wealth. She rode her bike down tree-lined streets, worked part-time at the local library during high school, and dreamed of becoming a teacher. Her mother, gentle but firm, instilled in her a belief that kindness mattered more than appearances, that dignity was a treasure no one could steal. For a time, Elena believed her life would remain simple, perhaps even small. She had no hunger for fame, no desire for glittering parties. She met him in her mid-20s at a charity fundraiser. Victor Hayes was magnetic, his voice deep, his smile sharp, his ambition like fire. He spotted Elena across the room and made his way to her as if she were the only person who mattered. Victor seemed fascinated by her quiet grace, her soft laughter, the way she didn't fawn over him like everyone else. Instead, she let him believe she was just a modest woman from Connecticut with a hopeful heart. 6 months later, they were married in a small ceremony. She cooked his meals, supported his dreams, listened to his plans, and built her life around him. When she discovered she was pregnant, her heart soared. She imagined a home filled with laughter, the pitter-patter of tiny feet. Bedtime stories whispered in the dark. Victor grew distant, impatient, cruel in ways that stung more than any slap could. He mocked her simple dresses, sneered at her reluctance to spend money, accused her of holding him back. When she told him about the baby, expecting him to be overjoyed, he rolled his eyes. "You think this is the right time? You don't even bring anything to the table, Elena. I'm carrying all the weight here." His words pierced her like daggers. She tried to fix things. She even considered telling him the truth about her inheritance, desperate to save their marriage. He loved control. Elena was 6 months pregnant, exhausted and fragile. "Don't fool yourself, Elena. You're nothing without me. Broke, weak, pathetic. No man would ever want you." So, there she was, pregnant, heartbroken, and alone on the wet streets of New York. She spent that night in a shabby motel, clutching her belly, whispering apologies to the child growing inside her. But something shifted in Elena that night. She remembered her father's words spoken long ago. "One day, the world will try to tell you what you're worth. Don't listen. You carry more power than they can imagine." The following weeks were a blur of quiet transformation. Elena met with lawyers who had managed her father's estate. For years, she had ignored their calls, content to let her fortune sit untouched. But now, with her dignity stripped and her child's future at stake, she embraced the truth. She wasn't broke. She was one of the wealthiest women in the country. Private islands, stakes in global corporations, a chain of luxury hotels, and yes, real estate across Manhattan, including one towering gem, the $50 million penthouse at Park Avenue. The very same penthouse Victor had once bragged about as if it were his own. She didn't storm back into his world right away. He told his friends she was broke, that she would come crawling back, begging for his help. He believed his lies so deeply that he never saw the truth creeping closer. And when Elena finally stepped out of the shadows, carrying not just her unborn child, but the weight of her legacy, she knew the time had come. She would return as the billionaire he could never break. The air itself smelled of money, leather, mahogany, and the faint trace of imported cigars. Guests whispered that no man in New York had climbed higher, both figuratively and literally. The parties he threw here were legendary. Rivers of champagne, orchestras tucked into alcoves, investors and celebrities mingling under the same glittering roof. It had always belonged to Elena Carter. It had been secured by her father years ago, wrapped in trusts so intricate that Victor's lawyers had never uncovered the truth. To him, it was his throne. The night she returned, the penthouse was alive with another of Victor's soirees. Crystal glasses clinked. Laughter rose in waves. A raven-haired beauty in a red sequined gown. Her laugh was shrill, echoing too loudly in the marble chamber. But Victor basked in it, proud to showcase her like a new trophy. He lifted his glass, entertaining a circle of investors with tales of his brilliance, his voice booming across the room. For in that moment, Elena Carter stepped inside. The contrast was breathtaking. Where the other women dripped in diamonds and feathers, Elena appeared in a simple ivory dress, her silhouette softened by her pregnancy. Yet the quiet elegance of her presence eclipsed every jewel in the room. Her hair fell in dark waves around her shoulders. She carried something far rarer. Undeniable power. Men who had once dismissed her as invisible suddenly straightened. Women whispered, some with pity, others with envy. Even the music seemed to falter as the quartet's bows trembled across strings. Victor froze. The wife he had mocked as penniless, the woman he had sworn would never survive without him, was here in his penthouse, at his party, in front of everyone. It was a battlefield. Her voice was calm, unshaken, carrying effortlessly across the room. Murmurs erupted. The mistress flushed scarlet, her painted smile trembling. "Elena," he said, his voice strained. A ripple of unease coursed through the room. Investors exchanged wary glances. Whispers swelled. Could it be true? Could she, the discarded wife, actually hold the real power? The city beyond glittered like a witness, the skyline shimmering with possibility. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation. He had used these walls to mock her, to parade his mistress, to pretend he was untouchable. Tonight, these walls would expose him. She had chosen to wield it tonight. Guests leaned closer, their curiosity sharpened into hunger. They could feel the storm brewing, sensed that this quiet woman was about to dismantle the illusion Victor had built. The setting was perfect, a glittering penthouse, a room full of witnesses, and a man too arrogant to realize the empire he flaunted had never truly been his. To the public, he was a titan of finance, a man who clawed his way from nothing to the penthouse in the clouds. The kind of man who could turn failing companies into gold with a single decision. He was greedy, insecure, and hungry for validation in a way that never ceased. No matter how much he acquired, it was never enough. He needed not just money, but worship. He needed the world to look at him and believe he was invincible. And the cruelest truth was that he had used Elena as a stepping stone in that climb. When they first met, he had played the part of the doting husband perfectly. But even then, Victor saw Elena as an accessory, not a partner. And so, he grew careless. The mistress on his arm now, a young woman named Serena Vale, was the latest in a long line of indulgences. To her, Victor was a ticket into the glittering world she had always dreamed of. She adored the expensive jewelry he draped on her, the designer gowns he paid for, the seats at galas where cameras flashed. She was willing to ignore his temper, his arrogance, his controlling ways because she thought she was winning. She had heard Victor mock his ex-wife countless times. Broke, he'd sneered. Pathetic. Probably living in some dingy apartment now. But the woman in front of her tonight was not pathetic. "I'm sure she's here for sentimental reasons." The words dripped with mockery, but his bravado cracked when Elena didn't flinch. She had always been the quiet voice of conscience he didn't want to hear. For all his wealth, Victor carried a secret weakness. Fear of being overshadowed. Fear of losing the admiration he craved. He had kept mistresses to feel powerful, cheated investors when he thought no one would notice, and silenced critics with money. But deep down, he knew the truth. She whispered, "Victor, why is she here? She looks different." "She's nothing," he snapped under his breath, though his eyes betrayed uncertainty. "Ignore her." Elena had chosen her entrance well, and now Victor's carefully curated image teetered on the edge of collapse. One of the investors, a silver-haired man named Charles Beaumont, cleared his throat. "Victor, you didn't tell us Elena was in town. We thought she had disappeared." Victor forced a laugh, but his face stiffened. "She's irrelevant. She has nothing to do with this world anymore." Elena's gaze flicked toward Charles, then back to Victor. "Funny," she said softly, "because this world has everything to do with me." Victor's hand tightened around his glass until it trembled. This was the true villain, stripped bare. Victor Hayes, the man who had once sneered that Elena was broke, was about to face a truth more devastating than bankruptcy. Because his greatest enemy was not another businessman, not a rival company, but the very woman he had thrown away. The penthouse was heavy with tension, its glittering chandeliers now seeming less like jewels and more like spotlights trained on the drama unfolding. Her hand rested protectively on her belly. Yet her posture radiated unshakable composure. His laughter too loud, too forced. "Ladies and gentlemen, don't be fooled. This is just a dramatic entrance. Elena doesn't belong here anymore. Well, she's nothing but my past. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others smirked, enjoying the spectacle. Serena, Victor's mistress, leaned closer to him, emboldened by his mockery. She looks like she wandered in from a charity line. What did you wear, Elena? The clearance rack. The laughter that followed was sharp, cruel, and it echoed in the marble room. She had known this moment would come. She had prepared for it. She took a slow breath. Victor smirked, believing he had regained control. He wrapped an arm tighter around Serena, flaunting her like a glittering trophy. See, this is what happens when you can't keep up. Some people just aren't built for this world. Elena thought she could play the part of a wife, but in the end, she couldn't afford it. Literally. The insult struck and gasps broke out. The investors, the socialites, the journalists quietly snapping photos. For a moment, Elena lowered her gaze, her fingers brushing her rounded belly as though drawing strength from within. Then she lifted her head, her eyes locking on Victor's. Interesting, she said softly, her voice steady despite the storm around her. Even Serena blinked in confusion. What are you talking about? Victor barked, his confidence wavering. For years, I let you parade me as nothing. For years, I listened as you told the world I was broke, irrelevant, unworthy. And yet here we stand, inside a penthouse purchased not with your brilliance, not with your money, but with my father's legacy. This home has always been mine. Every chandelier, every marble tile, every inch of glass in these walls belongs to me. A collective gasp swept the room. The quartet stopped playing entirely, their bows frozen mid-air. Victor's face flushed crimson. You think anyone here believes you? You're desperate, Elena. You'll say anything to humiliate me. But the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Elena's gaze was unwavering. Serena's grip on his arm slackened. She had never heard that story. The guests leaned closer, scandal and shock filling their eyes. Victor tried to laugh again, but it came out hollow. Then perhaps you should explain to them why your supposed empire is drowning in debt, or why half the properties you claim as your own are mortgaged to the brink. You see, Victor, I know more about your books than you think. You left enough trails behind and it wasn't hard to follow them. Now the room erupted in whispers. Investors exchanged sharp glances, some pulling out phones to check emails, others stepping back as if Victor's downfall might be contagious. Serena's eyes widened in panic. Instead, it was he who stood exposed, humiliated, his empire teetering on collapse under the weight of her revelations. The chandeliers above glittered like judgment, the marble walls echoed with whispers of scandal, and the city beyond the glass windows twinkled as if celebrating the moment. In the middle of it all, Elena stood tall, her hand on her belly, her eyes steady. She had endured his cruelty, his betrayal, his public humiliation. And now in the very heart of his kingdom, she had turned the tables. And as Victor staggered under the weight of her words, the crowd knew they had only witnessed the beginning of her reckoning. Investors whispered frantically, Serena pulled away in shock, and Victor barked orders. No one obeyed. Yet for Elena, the noise blurred into a dull hum. Her hand clutched her belly as her child kicked, as if sensing her turmoil. Elena, a voice hissed. One of the maids she had once tipped kindly when Victor never bothered. Are you all right? Elena forced a smile, though her vision blurred at the edges. I'm fine, she whispered. The humiliation of laughter still echoed in her mind. The sting of Serena's cruel words, the memories of being tossed onto the streets, the months of loneliness, all of it came crashing back in waves. She had faced Victor with courage, but now she was drowning in the aftermath. Victor seized the moment. She can't even stand on her own 2 feet. This is the woman claiming power. This is the woman who thinks she owns this place. Don't be fooled. She's weak. She always has been. Some guests chuckled nervously, siding with the louder voice in the room. The sting was sharp. She wanted to scream, to collapse, to run from the suffocating marble walls closing in. She stumbled toward the balcony, desperate for air. But her reflection in the glass doors showed a woman pale, weary, broken. The memory of that rainy night returned when she had been shoved out with nothing but a suitcase. The same despair threatened to consume her now. She thought of the motel room where she had cried alone, of the phone calls unanswered, of the friends who had turned their backs. Was she still powerless now? Behind her, Victor's voice boomed, regaining confidence. You see, she can talk, but she can't deliver. She's nothing but a dramatic act. I built this life. Me, not her. She'll crawl back to whatever hole she came from. For a terrifying second, she wondered if she had made a mistake stepping into this world at all. Soft but firm. Dignity, Elena. That's your treasure. Don't let anyone steal it. She heard her father's words. You carry more power than they can imagine. She turned away from the glass, wiping her tears quickly before anyone could see. All the strength she had forced herself to carry broke open. Pathetic, he muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. A hand rested gently on Elena's shoulder. His eyes were kind, steady. Don't let him win, he whispered. His words struck her like a lifeline. Now, here was someone who saw her, not as broken, not as weak, but as resilient. Victor, sensing the shift, barked louder. The words were his undoing. Because in that moment, Elena lifted her head, her eyes blazing through tears. You're home, she whispered, her voice gaining strength. No, Victor. This was never your home. Investors leaned forward. Victor froze, the arrogance draining from his face as Elena straightened, dignity restored. The storm inside her had cleared, leaving only resolve. She had broken down. Yes, she had cried, trembled, doubted herself. But now, rising from that vulnerable moment, she carried something stronger than anger. Clarity. I may stumble. I may fall, but I will always rise again. And tonight, everyone here will see exactly what I am capable of. The crowd stirred, sensing the tide turning once more. The collapse had ended. The crowd waited, holding their breath, the air thick with anticipation. The moment of collapse had passed. No longer the discarded wife, no longer the broken victim, but someone about to reveal the truth Victor Hayes had never imagined. What are you babbling about now, Elena? You've embarrassed yourself enough. Go home, wherever that is these days. Leave this place to people who belong. Elena's lips curved into a small smile. The crowd stirred. Investors leaned forward, sensing something monumental. Even Serena clutched her sequin gown, her eyes darting nervously between them. Elena took a slow step forward, her hand brushing the edge of the marble table. Years ago, before I ever met you, my father built something extraordinary. He was a man who valued privacy, who believed wealth should never dictate character. So he kept his empire hidden, layers of trusts, private holdings, companies scattered across the globe. To the world, he was simply a successful businessman. But in reality, he was one of the wealthiest men in America. My father left it all to me, Elena continued, her voice unwavering. The silence was deafening. Only the sound of clinking ice from an abandoned glass punctuated the air. Victor's face drained of color. The crowd erupted. Serena stumbled back, her confidence dissolving. Elena stepped closer, her eyes blazing. Don't I? I own stakes in companies across 5 continents. I control shipping lines, tech firms, luxury hotels. My signature moves billions every year. And you? She paused, her words sharp as glass. You were just a man I once loved. A man too blind to see who I truly was. Too arrogant to realize you were married to someone far more powerful than you could ever be. The room erupted again, louder this time. Investors exchanged glances filled with calculation. For years, they had aligned themselves with Victor, believing him untouchable. But tonight, they saw the truth. The real power had never been his. Victor staggered, his hands trembling. No, you can't. Yes, I can, Elena's voice sliced through his denial. Do you want to know the cruelest part, Victor? While you mocked me as broke, while you laughed about me being nothing, I could have bought and sold you 100 times over. But I didn't because I didn't need to prove myself to you. But now. Her gaze swept the room, catching every pair of eyes. Now I do. Not for me, but for my child. For the future we deserve. Serena's face twisted in disbelief. So you're saying? You're the billionaire? Elena turned to her, her expression almost pitying. Yes, I am the billionaire you both mocked. And tonight, the truth sets me free. The silence stretched, then fractured into chaos. Investors surrounded one another, furious whispers of deals gone wrong, of lies Victor had told. Some demanded answers, others slipped away, unwilling to be associated with a man whose empire had just been revealed as a fraud. Victor's mask crumbled completely. He lunged toward Elena, his voice ragged. You think this changes anything? You think they'll respect you? You're still just. Elena raised a hand, stopping him cold. Careful, Victor. Every insult you speak now only proves to them what I've known all along. You were never a man of class, never a man of honor. You're nothing without the lies you built. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. For the first time, Victor wasn't the center of admiration. He was the center of shame. Charles Beaumont, the silver-haired investor, stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Elena. Mrs. Carter, he said respectfully. If what you say is true, then I think we all know who the real power in this room is. Elena nodded graciously, her eyes softening. It is true, and I will prove it. But tonight isn't about flaunting power. Tonight is about reclaiming dignity. For too long, I was silent. For too long, I let cruelty define me. No more. The applause that followed was hesitant at first, then grew stronger. Some clapped in admiration, others out of fear of what she now represented. But in that moment, Elena didn't care. She wasn't here for their approval. She was here for justice. Victor staggered back, his face pale, sweat glistening at his temples. He had lost. The mistress at his side slipped away quietly, unwilling to share in his downfall. The investors who had once propped him up now turned their backs. His empire, his image, his pride, it all collapsed before his eyes. And Elena stood in the center of it all, radiant, unshaken, untouchable. The twist was complete. The woman mocked as broke was in fact the billionaire who owned everything he thought was his. And now the world knew it. The night of the penthouse confrontation left the city buzzing. Newspapers splashed headlines across their front pages. Discarded wife revealed as billionaire heiress, Victor Hayes exposed, power shifts in Manhattan. Social media exploded with photos of Elena standing in ivory, hand on her belly, while Victor looked on in stunned humiliation. But for Elena, the headlines were only the beginning. Her true transformation didn't happen under the chandeliers of that penthouse. It began the next morning in the quiet of her own reflection. She stood before a mirror in her father's old townhouse. The dawn light painting her face in gold. For the first time in months, her eyes didn't look tired. They looked alive. The woman staring back was not the timid wife who had once begged for scraps of affection. She was not the broken soul who had cried in a motel room, whispering apologies to her unborn child. No, this woman was steel wrapped in grace, fire hidden in calm. She reached for a necklace, her mother's heirloom. The pendant was simple, a sapphire set in gold, but it carried generations of dignity. Elena fastened it around her neck with trembling fingers. It was more than jewelry. It was a crown. That day, she called her team of lawyers, financial advisors, and longtime family allies. She had avoided them for years, too focused on love, too afraid of what wealth could turn her into. But now she embraced their presence. They greeted her with respect, not pity. "Mrs. Carter," they said, voices steady. "It's time we take back what is yours." Her wardrobe changed, too. Not for vanity, but for symbolism. Gone were the soft dresses that made her blend into the background. She chose tailored gowns that spoke of elegance, power, and authority. A deep navy dress for meetings, crimson silk for galas, black velvet for press appearances. Each choice was deliberate, a silent declaration. I am no longer invisible. But the transformation went beyond clothing. It was in her voice, her posture, her decisions. She walked into boardrooms once dominated by men like Victor, and spoke with calm authority. She unveiled strategies for companies her father had left, revitalized projects Victor had mocked her for even mentioning. She spoke not with arrogance, but with conviction, and even the most skeptical investors found themselves leaning forward. Captivated. The media couldn't get enough. Cameras followed her every move, dubbing her the pregnant billionaire, a symbol of resilience and rebirth. Women across the city wrote letters to her, thanking her for showing that strength could rise from betrayal. Men who had once ignored her now begged for meetings. Yet through it all, Elena remained grounded, her hand often resting on her belly as a reminder of her true purpose, the child who gave her courage. Victor, meanwhile, spiraled. His calls went unanswered. His investors fled. Serena abandoned him within days. Photographed on the arm of another wealthy man. He raged, spreading lies about Elena, claiming she was manipulating everyone. But the world no longer listened. His empire crumbled as swiftly as his pride. Elena did not gloat. She didn't need to. Watching him fade was satisfaction enough. Her focus was not on revenge for its own sake. It was on transformation, on building something new from the ashes of her pain. Weeks passed and her influence grew. Invitations flooded in galas, charity balls, conferences. At first, she hesitated. She remembered the cruelty of high society, the way they had laughed at her. But this time, she would not walk into their rooms as prey. She would walk in as the storm. Her most symbolic transformation came on the night of the Manhattan Winter Gala. It was the very same event where Victor had once mocked her behind her back, parading Serena like a jewel. Now the city buzzed with anticipation. Elena Carter was attending, and everyone wanted to see her. She arrived in a sleek black gown that hugged her figure, her pregnancy visible yet regal. A diamond bracelet glimmered at her wrist, not borrowed or gifted by a man, but chosen by herself. The sapphire pendant still hung around her neck, her mother's silent blessing. When she entered the ballroom, silence fell just as it had in the penthouse weeks earlier. But this silence was different. It was not mockery. It was reverence. Elena Carter, the announcer declared, a philanthropist and business leader. Applause erupted. Not hesitant, not forced, but genuine. She walked through the crowd with her head high, acknowledging nods, offering smiles. Women approached her with admiration. Men extended hands, eager for alliances. She was no longer Victor's ex-wife. She was Elena Carter, a force in her own right. At the gala, a journalist asked her, "What message do you want the world to take from your story?" Elena paused, her hand resting gently on her belly. Her voice was calm, but carried through the hall. That dignity cannot be stolen, that strength often grows in silence. And that women, no matter how broken we may feel, are capable of rebuilding empires from ashes. This isn't just my transformation. It's a reminder to every woman watching that we are not defined by the men who betray us. We define ourselves. The room erupted in applause again, louder this time. Victor, though uninvited, had attempted to sneak into the gala. From the shadows he watched, seething as the woman he once ridiculed commanded the room effortlessly. She had transformed beyond his reach, beyond his insults, beyond his power. For the first time, he realized he could never control her again. And Elena knew it, too. She didn't need his acknowledgement. She didn't even need his downfall. Her transformation was complete, not because she defeated Victor, but because she reclaimed herself. The city skyline sparkled outside the ballroom windows, a reflection of the fire now alive in her soul. The timid wife was gone. In her place stood a woman reborn, powerful, radiant, unstoppable. And the world would never forget her name again. The city had already crowned Elena Carter its new queen of resilience, but her story was far from over. Victor Hayes still lingered like a shadow in the background, refusing to fade quietly. Though his empire crumbled, his arrogance had not. He still told anyone who would listen that Elena's fortune was exaggerated, that she had manipulated the press, that she was nothing but a dramatic liar. Elena knew she could ignore him and still win. But she also knew the world needed closure. There could be no lingering doubt, no whisper that Victor still held power. Her revenge would not be petty. It would be public, undeniable, and final. The opportunity came at the International Business Forum Gala, a prestigious event where the city's most powerful gathered. For years, Victor had dreamed of being the keynote speaker, the man on stage commanding respect. This year, however, the honor was Elena's. The ballroom shimmered with golden light, the air buzzing with anticipation. Men in tuxedos and women in glittering gowns filled the space, their conversations swirling with rumors of what Elena might say. At the far end of the room stood a massive stage draped in velvet, where a crystal podium awaited. Victor, uninvited yet again, still found his way in. He stood near the back, glass of whiskey in hand, his eyes fixed on Elena like daggers. He told himself he still had power, that he could disrupt her speech, expose her as weak. But deep down he knew he was outmatched. When Elena entered, the crowd hushed. She wore a deep emerald gown that glowed against her skin, her sapphire pendant resting proudly on her chest. Her pregnancy was more visible now, yet it only enhanced her presence. She looked not like a woman weighed down, but like a queen carrying the future itself. She took the stage to thunderous applause. The lights reflected in her eyes as she looked out over the sea of faces. Slowly, deliberately, she began. Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you tonight, not just as a business leader, but as a woman who has walked through fire, and come out whole. Many of you know pieces of my story. You've read the headlines, heard the whispers, but tonight I will tell you the truth, not for gossip, but for justice. The room fell silent. Even Victor froze. Elena continued, her voice clear and unwavering. I married a man who I believed loved me. I gave him my heart, my loyalty, my trust. In return, he gave me betrayal. He mocked me, abandoned me while I carried our child, and told the world I was worthless. He stood in the penthouse my father left me, and he called it his own. He told his friends I was broke, even as I silently carried an empire in my hands. Gasps swept through the audience. Cameras flashed. Journalists scribbled notes furiously. But tonight, Elena said, her gaze sweeping the room. We close that chapter, because betrayal cannot destroy truth. Lies cannot erase dignity. And no man has the right to decide a woman's worth. Thunderous applause broke out. But Elena raised a hand, calling for silence. And to those who still doubt me, she said, her tone sharp now. I offer proof. At her signal, a large screen behind her flickered to life. Documents appeared. Ownership deeds of the penthouse, shareholder lists from global companies, bank records tying her fortune back generations. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. Every claim Victor had ever made about her being broke crumbled in that instant. The crowd erupted into cheers, gasps, and applause. Investors stood, clapping in respect. Women in the audience wept openly. The screen scrolled with proof after proof, sealing her legacy in stone. Victor's face turned ashen. He stumbled back, his whiskey spilling. "No, no, this can't be real," he muttered. She's tricking you all." But the room no longer listened. They had seen the truth with their own eyes. Elena looked directly at him, her voice like thunder. "You told the world I was broke, Victor. You humiliated me in front of strangers. You discarded me like I was nothing. Tonight, I return the favor. Tonight, the world sees you for what you are. A man who built nothing, who stole credit, who mocked the woman who could have been your greatest ally. You didn't just lose me, Victor. You lost everything." The crowd roared with applause, some even chanting her name. Cameras flashed wildly, capturing every angle. Victor's humiliation was complete. He was no longer a mogul, no longer feared, no longer respected. He was a broken man standing in the ruins of his lies. Serena, once his mistress, was also in the crowd. She turned away from him, ashamed, unwilling to be associated with his downfall. Investors who had once begged for his attention now surrounded Elena, offering alliances, partnerships, admiration. Elena raised her hand once more, her final words echoing like a hammer striking stone. "This is not just my revenge. This is a warning to every man who believes he can tear down a woman and walk away unscathed. We rise. We rebuild. And when we return stronger than you can imagine." The room exploded into standing ovations, thunderous claps reverberating off the golden walls. Elena Carter had not only reclaimed her dignity, she had publicly destroyed the man who betrayed her, ensuring his downfall was permanent. Victor slumped against the wall, defeated. For the first time, he realized Elena was untouchable. She had won not through cruelty, not through lies, but through truth, dignity, and undeniable strength. And as the crowd cheered her name, Elena stood radiant, hand resting on her belly. She had given the world its spectacle, its reckoning, its justice. The public revenge was complete. And from this night forward, no one would ever doubt her again. The night of the International Business Forum Gala ended with Elena Carter standing as the undeniable victor. The applause still echoed in her ears as she returned to her townhouse, the sapphire pendant warm against her skin, her hand gently resting on her belly. For the first time in a long time, she felt peace. The storm had passed. Victor Hayes had been silenced, not by threats or scandals, but by truth. His empire collapsed in the days that followed. Investors abandoned him, creditors circled, and the media painted him not as a mogul, but as a fraud. He retreated into the shadows. A broken man with no throne left to sit upon. Serena was gone. The socialites who once fawned over him turned their backs and his name became a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms, "Don't build castles on lies." Elena, however, was just beginning. Her transformation from abandoned wife to billionaire heiress was no longer just a personal journey. It became a movement. Women across the country wrote letters sharing their own stories of betrayal, abuse, and survival. They saw in Elena not just wealth, but resilience, dignity, and proof that no woman was truly powerless. Moved by their words, Elena launched the Carter Foundation for Women and Children. Dedicated to helping those left with nothing after betrayal. The foundation provided housing for single mothers, scholarships for young women, and legal aid for those fighting for justice. Elena poured her heart into it, determined that no woman would ever feel as alone as she once had. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the foundation's first shelter, journalists swarmed her, microphones thrust forward. One asked, "Elena, what drives you to do this after everything you've been through?" Elena smiled softly, her eyes bright with conviction. "Because pain should never be wasted. If I suffered, it wasn't for nothing. It was to show others that from the deepest wounds, we can build the strongest foundations. I want every woman to know. Betrayal may break you, but it does not define you. You define you." Applause erupted. Cameras flashed, and across the nation, women wiped tears from their eyes, inspired by her words. Months passed and Elena's influence grew beyond business. She became a speaker at global conferences advocating for women in leadership. She was invited to universities where young students listened eagerly as she spoke of dignity, resilience, and power. Everywhere she went, she carried her child with her. Sometimes in her arms, sometimes still within her, always as a symbol of the strength that had carried her through. When her son was born, she named him Gabriel, after the angel who brings messages of hope. Holding him for the first time, she whispered, "You saved me before you even arrived, and now I'll make sure the world you grow up in is worthy of you." The media celebrated his birth. But for Elena, it was personal. Gabriel was the reason she had stood tall, the reason she had refused to let Victor's cruelty destroy her. He was her anchor, her reminder that love, real love, was still possible. Victor by then was nothing more than a ghost of the past. Occasionally, tabloids would catch him wandering drunkenly out of a bar, his suit wrinkled, his face hollow. The world no longer cared about him. His name brought only pity, not power. And Elena never spoke his name again. To her, he was finished. Her focus was on building, not destroying. She expanded her businesses, modernized her father's empire, and used her wealth to uplift others. She no longer shrank from cameras or whispered apologies for existing. She stood proudly, a woman who had faced betrayal and turned it into strength. At one of her last public speeches that year, in front of a packed auditorium filled with women, she told her story one final time, not to relive the pain, but to remind them of the ending. "I was once the woman you saw mocked, discarded, called broke, and irrelevant. I was told I had no worth. I believed those lies for too long. But here's the truth. Your worth is never decided by someone else's opinion of you. Your worth is written in your dignity, your resilience, your refusal to give up. I stand here not as Victor Hayes' ex-wife, but as Elena Carter, mother, leader, survivor. And if I can rise, so can you." The crowd stood cheering. Tears streaming down faces. Women hugged one another. Strangers united by the hope Elena had given them. As the applause thundered, Elena glanced down at Gabriel sleeping peacefully in his stroller. His tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. She smiled. This was her legacy. Not the wealth, not the power, not even the headlines. Her legacy was the proof that women could rise from betrayal stronger than before. That night, as she looked out over the city skyline from her penthouse, Elena whispered softly, "It's over. We made it." The city lights twinkled in response, as if bowing to her. The pain, the humiliation, the collapse, it had all led here, to dignity restored, to justice delivered, to hope reborn. And the world, watching her story, would never again doubt the strength of a woman betrayed. Because Elena Carter had proven that when a woman rises, she doesn't just rise for herself, she rises for everyone. So that's it, my dear friends. Our story has come to a close. And if you're still here with me right now, it means something in this journey has touched your heart in a special way. Maybe it reminded you of your own struggles, or maybe it gave you the strength to believe again. The Stoics once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this and you will find strength. That's what Elena's story shows us. Betrayal, loss, and humiliation can break us for a moment, but they don't define us. What defines us is how we rise, how we choose dignity over despair, and how we turn pain into purpose. So, let's carry that lesson with us. If this story spoke to you and you want to see more content that empowers and inspires, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support allows us to keep telling stories that matter. Thank you for watching, and remember, no matter the storm, you have the strength to rebuild your own empire. Until next time, stay strong.